Iowa One Call is an important tool designed and put in place to enhance safety awareness and damage prevention. It's important that everyone involved in this industry acknowledge the reality of potential hazards. You're aware that incidents involving pressurized natural gas can be hazardous, and some of you veterans of the industry may have experienced firsthand the ramifications of digging into high-pressure gas lines. The following graphic images were taken in Iowa and surrounding states and show just how severe things can get. Here is an excavation-related incident that occurred in Dubuque. This is what's left of an excavator that struck a natural gas distribution line. You can only imagine what happened to the operator. For the typical excavator, working around high-voltage underground electric systems is becoming nearly routine. Some of you may have experienced firsthand similar situations. This is an electrical injury. This is the exit point where the electricity exited the contractor's body. Here is another more severe electricity exit wound. Coming in contact with electricity and becoming part of the circuit can be grave. According to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, injuries to construction workers top injuries and deaths in a single industry sector. Construction deaths account for 1 in 5 work-related deaths. Construction workers have a fatal occupational injury rate that is 3 times higher than other occupations. This is why your daily routines, planning, preparation, and precaution are critical. You should have and practice a prepared safety plan to reduce potential risks. Observe industry best practices to prioritize safety and damage prevention. Combat complacency and adopt a prepared, practiced daily routine. Contingency planning is always important. Don't be caught off guard. Underground facilities, you must know what the hazards are. Don't rely solely on locate markings. Always observe your surroundings. Always be aware. Always stay alert. Observe your surroundings. Look for visual indicators like transformers, junction points, and meters. Typically, these are located away from buildings and structures. A typical commercial or residential job site will have multiple communications pedestals or vaults for phone, fiber, and cable. There may be multiple different types of underground facilities present. Some you may not recognize, but there will always be entry and exit points. Coming in from the distribution or feeder lines and exiting as service lines to the designated property. Blind digging without marks or reference points is dangerous. Dangerous to you, your crews, and the community. Don't forget about overhead utilities. Where there's overhead electric, it's likely that there are risers on utility poles where the electric lines run down and transition into underground electric lines. Sometimes there will be visible signs and markers telling you there are underground facilities present. Other times, physical signs and markers may be buried during the installation of the facility. Stop digging immediately if you encounter one of these buried markers. It's important to know that not all buried facilities will get located and marked. Don't assume everything has been located and marked. Look for transformers, risers, meters, and transitional junctions, which may be points of demarcation. Private secondaries are more typical on commercial sites. For a general reference, use line of sight between the junction at the building and the demarcation point. Contact the utility or utility representative locator and ask them if they are aware of any secondary lines. And always pothole to the depth of planned excavation for visual verification. Excavators need to be aware of secondary electric facilities that may be private. Here's an example of a secondary electric situation where there is an electric transformer which in this case is a demarcation point, where the portion of line owned by the utility enters and then transitions to a secondary private electric line that runs somewhere to the commercial complex. That secondary line, in many cases, will not be located and marked. Here's a situation that looks similar with a transformer located away from the complex, but in this case there is a public right-of-way, a street, that runs between the transformer and the complex. Is this line running between the transformer and the complex private, or does it require locating and marking? Note that buried facilities under any public right-of-way are not private facilities, because the public right-of-way is not owned by any private or commercial landowners. And therefore, these lines must be registered with Iowa One Call as underground facilities. But never assume anything, and always pay attention to the surroundings at every project. It's important to become familiar with utility tariffs. The way utility tariffs are written can determine ownership of a facility. Here's an actual copy of a utility tariff. Notice the highlighted section that says, a non-residential applicant including multiple unit dwellings and pre-manufactured home parks will provide, install, and maintain the service line to the point of attachment to the company's facilities as specified by the company. And note in this section, it states that the service will be furnished, installed, owned, and maintained by the customer, and that the company, or the utility, will terminate the cables in the transformer, or in this case, the demarcation point. Here is an example. There is a riser on the pole where the electric owned by the utility is going into the ground. But there is no transformer where the utility can terminate the cable as stated in the tariff. There's no demarcation point here. In this case, the demarcation point is where the line goes into the ground, and the portion that runs to the complex is an unmarked secondary. So again, pay attention to risers. Keep in mind, though, if it runs under a public right-of-way, someone has to register it with Iowa One Call. In the case of tariffs, it may be the customer or property owner's responsibility. You may encounter situations where there are multiple sets of buried secondary lines. Iowa Code Chapter 480 defines what an underground facility is. Private facilities are not defined in the code. Private facility owners are not required to register with Iowa One Call. Private facilities, therefore, are typically not located and marked. Under Iowa Code, private facilities cannot exist in any public right-of-way. The public right-of-way is not private property. Plan for private facilities and inspect the property for visual indicators, and pothole to the depth of planned excavation whenever practical. In advance of any project, communicate with property owners in advance of any excavation. Establish whether there are private or secondary facilities present by looking for visual indicators via an advanced site visit whenever practical. Establish ownership of any private or secondary facilities, keeping in mind property owners may be unaware of their responsibilities. Excavators, establish your roles and responsibilities. Establish who is responsible for private or secondary facilities. Develop and utilize prepared forms and disclaimers as agreements. Ask that property owners sign off on these forms as acknowledgement. For your protection, potholing is recommended for improving safety and limiting liability. The recommended best practice is to always pothole to the depth of planned excavation. Iowa Code does authorize utility operators to require visual verification of their facilities within the 18-inch tolerance zone. Don't ever assume that the first facility seen is the only facility present. As most of you are aware, abandoned facilities that don't get flagged are a real issue and an unknown factor. And that is why it's so important to pothole to the planned depth of excavation. There are documented incidents when excavators encountered an abandoned facility believing it to be the live facility, then miscalculating where to bore, resulting in direct contact with the live facility. Be aware that hidden hazards do exist. Never make assumptions. The consequences could be tragic. Use hand probing and hand digging methods when hydrovacking isn't available. The broad legal definition of excavation includes concrete saw cutting as well as the removal of concrete, which are both operations that can benefit from exposing facilities with hydrovacking. Excavators are responsible for preserving the markings. Locate markings are an important safety tool and must be respected. Iowa law requires excavators to preserve the locate markings, stating that an excavator is responsible for preserving the markings at all times during the excavation. If the markings will be destroyed or otherwise altered during the excavation, the excavator shall establish suitable reference points which will enable the excavator to locate the underground facilities at all times during the excavation. In addition to preserving the markings, excavators are required to establish suitable reference points in case the markings are destroyed. Offset staking or other ground marking practices can provide effective reference points. Once the physical reference points have been established, notations can be made for future verification. A cell phone or electronic device works extremely well. There's always the tried and true method of using a measuring tape and notepad. Excavators may request refresh markings through the Iowa one-call system, but this does not preclude the requirement to preserve the markings. The rule for locate markings state, the markings shall be done in a manner that will last for a minimum of 5 working days on any non-permanent surface or a minimum of 10 working days on any permanent surface. If the excavation will continue for any period longer than such periods, the operator shall provide remarks upon the request of the excavator through the notification center. An excavator must maintain the markings throughout an excavation and during any interim period before an excavation begins, and should therefore refrain from requesting locates too far in advance. To gain a better perspective of Iowa One Call, the system, it's best to understand the trends, governance, and legislative landscape. This 10-year trending graph shows the ongoing escalation of activity in terms of the number of actual annual notices transmitted to utilities. In other words, the number of annual tickets. And during this past 10 years, there has been a 38% increase in annual locate notices, representing nearly 1 million more locate tickets annually. This graph represents the past 30 years since the Iowa One Call law was enacted. This reflects a 267% increase in annual locate notices, which is 2.6 million additional annual locate notices. The Iowa One Call law, or Iowa Code Chapter 480, can be looked at as an umbrella under which multiple mandates impact multiple parties, starting with the requirement that there be a central notification center and process available, and that a board of directors be established, with the board having oversight of and governance of the notification center. The board does not have any enforcement oversight or authority over utilities, excavators, or locators. Under this legal umbrella, there is required participation, as well as required enforcement. Under the required participation, both excavators and operators have legal responsibilities, with excavators bound to specific laws, including but not limited to the requirements to provide notice, wait 48 hours before excavating, provide white lining, preserve the markings, report damages, and excavate with due care to safeguard the underground facilities. And operators are bound to specific requirements, including but not limited to participation with the center, provide positive response, provide 48-hour response, coordinate with excavators, provide refresh locates, and maintain a facility database. Enforcement oversight of these requirements is handled exclusively by the Iowa Attorney General's Office, where authority is granted to establish civil penalties. Here we have the Assistant Iowa Attorney General with an update on recent legal actions.
One-call enforcement is one of the duties assigned to the Attorney General by Iowa's One-Call Law, Chapter 480. This video is intended to provide updates for recent enforcement action the Attorney General's Office has taken under Chapter 480. In 2023, our office filed 3 enforcement actions. The first involved a 2022 excavation in Anamosa, Iowa, where excavations were undertaken to install a water service line without providing 48 hours notice of the excavation. After the excavator was told by the property owner that there were no underground facilities in the vicinity of the planned excavation, the excavation went forward without placing a locate request. During the excavation, the defendant hit and severed a natural gas pipeline. We filed suit and obtained default judgment against the excavator, imposing a $10,000 civil penalty and a permanent injunction against further violations. The second case involved a 2022 excavation in Boone County. The excavation was removing sod and driving steel stakes into the ground to prep for concrete work, and they failed to provide 40 hours notice of the excavation. The homeowner had previously placed a locate request, but that ticket had expired at the time of the excavation. In any event, the excavator, not the homeowner, needs to place the locate request. An excavator cannot rely upon somebody else's locate request. The excavation went directly over a gas line and the metal stakes were within several feet of the gas line. We filed suit and the excavator paid a civil penalty of $4,000 and agreed to a permanent injunction. The final case involved multiple excavations in 2022 in Marion County. The excavations involved the removal and replacement of driveways without providing 40 hours notice of the excavations. We had previously filed a lawsuit against the same excavator for the same violations, and the excavator agreed to pay a $7,000 civil penalty. For the 2022 excavations, the excavator failed to place a locate request for one of the excavations, and for the other 2, they placed a locate request but proceeded with the excavations prior to the expiration of the 48 hours and prior to all underground facilities being located and marked. One of the excavations resulted in damage to an underground facility. We filed suit, and the excavator paid a civil penalty of $15,000 for the violation and agreed to a permanent injunction. A final point our office wants to make is to help clarify what our office's role is under Iowa's One-Call Law and some of the limitations under that law. Under Iowa Code Chapter 480, our office is responsible for determining and evaluating whether a violation of Iowa's One-Call Law has occurred. Under Chapter 480, we are not responsible for, nor can we provide any advice about, whether someone is liable for damages to an underground facility. That is a separate legal issue, and those questions should be asked to your own legal counsel and/or insurance company. The kinds of activities that can result in an enforcement action include, but are not limited to, failing to request locates prior to an excavation, requesting locates but failing to wait for the underground facilities to be located and marked within the 48 hours, failing to timely renew a locate request prior to expiration within 20 days, failing to notify the owner or operator of damage to an underground facility, failing to exercise due care when excavating in a marked area in order to avoid damaging an underground facility, failing to timely locate and mark an underground facility, indicating an excavator has agreed to a marking schedule when no such agreement has been made, and failing to accurately locate and mark an underground facility. In closing, when followed, the One-Call Law saves lives, prevents personal injuries, and protects essential utilities, property, and the environment. We trust that most of you attending this important program are familiar with the Iowa One-Call Law and fully comply. Our only hope is that these brief comments will serve as a reminder to everyone of the importance of this law and the potential consequences when the law is violated. Thank you.
These laws are enacted through legislation. The law, Iowa Code Chapter 480, is enacted through legislation. No changes can be made outside of the Iowa legislature. Amendments start as proposed bills in either the House or Senate. Bills must pass through in both the House and Senate, subcommittees and committees. Interested parties can lobby to change or add to any bill. A bill can be killed before it ever makes it into law. All involved parties must work together to draft an agreed-upon bill. Legislators can approve or stop a bill before it passes the committee. Once approved in both the House and Senate, a bill is sent on for approval. The governor signs bills into law. The law grants authority to the Board of Iowa One Call to oversee and govern the Notification Center, including system and programming oversight, under which they oversee the development of effective and efficient center processes designed to mitigate delays and maximize efficiency and to address issues through programming and processes. Recently implemented programs and processes include the Electronic Positive Response Ticket Status System, online ticketing featuring state-of-the-art mapping technologies, an online joint meet program with enhanced excavator management tools, the dynamic start time process to help mitigate locating delays, new locator requirements for the agreed-to marking schedule status process, and a new non-response escalation process for excavators to deal with non-response locators. Under the required positive response system, operators must notify the notification center of the status for all notices within the required 48-hour period. Any status other than marked and clear will require the operator or locator to contact or notify the excavator that additional action or information is required, or that the operator would like to request an alternative marking schedule, which is only valid if an agreement is made. Note that status codes do not close tickets. Under the positive response system, there are 9 status codes, of which only some are mandated by law. The default code 0 is not yet responded. Code 1 is clear, no conflict exists. Code 2 is marked, when the locating and marking has been completed. Code 3 is marked, including private, when the locating and marking has been completed, including private facilities. Code 4 is agreed to marking schedule, when the locating and marking will be completed as agreed by the operator and excavator. A mutual agreement must exist. Code 5, standby required marked, is when the locating and marking has been completed, but the operator requires an operator representative to be on site during the excavation. Code 6, standby required not marked, is when the operator requires an excavator-operator pre-excavation meeting on site prior to the locating and marking. Code 7, not marked, inadequate information. In the event an excavator has not provided adequate descriptive information and or white lining, and must do so prior to the locating and marking. And Code 8, not marked, no access. Note that locating and marking may be delayed until the operator and locator gain access. Reasonable efforts must be taken to meet the 48-hour period. Of these codes, only 3 are defined in Iowa Code Chapter 480, clear, marked, and agreed to marking schedule. However, a ticket may be statused as not marked, inadequate information if an excavator fails to provide the required information. Here are the key sections in the law that address status codes. In this section, the operator shall complete the locating and marking and shall notify the notification center that the marking is complete within 48 hours after receiving the notice, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays, unless otherwise agreed upon by the excavator and the operator. This is the section that requires operators to provide positive response, and they must provide status for all tickets. And it is here, unless otherwise agreed by the operator and excavator, that establishes the agreed-to marking schedule status as a legal exception. And here, an operator who receives notice from the notification center, who determines that the operator does not have any underground facilities located within the proposed area of excavation, shall notify the notification center concerning this determination within 48 hours, etc. This section authorizes the status of clear, when there is no conflict between the proposed excavation and any underground facilities. Excavators must provide detailed descriptive information of the planned excavation. There are multiple specific descriptive requirements, including, among other things, address and location of the planned excavation, as well as the requirement that excavators use white paint, white flags, white stakes, or a combination thereof to mark the proposed area of excavation, known as white lining. Failure to provide the required adequate information may result in a status of not marked, inadequate information, which could potentially delay locates. The law does provide for 3 exceptions to the required white lining: when the precise location, direction, size, and length of the proposed excavation area can be clearly and adequately defined and described during the call to the notification center or during an on-site pre-construction meeting. When electronic means of white lining is supported by the notification center and used by the excavator, and when physical pre-marking can be shown to be impractical, in which case, however, there would need to be alternative arrangements made, such as a pre-construction meeting, on-site joint meet, or other means of communication in order for the excavator to convey the appropriate description of the planned excavation area. Prior to any excavation, an excavator shall provide notice of the planned excavation. Is the requirement excavators are bound to for providing notice of any planned excavation. The notice shall be valid for 20 calendar days from the date the notice was provided to the notification center. The notice remains open for 20 calendar days. There is no status code that closes a ticket. Tickets cannot be closed by a locator. Status codes show ticket completion progress regarding the 48-hour requirement. An excavator, however, may request to have their ticket closed. These status codes are not mandated in Chapter 480. Standby required, not marked, is not an exception to the required 48-hour time period. An operator or locator must coordinate the meeting within the required 48-hour period, unless otherwise agreed between the operator and the excavator. Standby required, marked. When an operator has completed the locating and marking, but requests that excavation occur with an operator representative on site during the excavation, this is not an exception to the required 48-hour timeline. The operator or locator must coordinate the meeting within the required 48-hour time period, unless otherwise agreed between the operator and the excavator. Excavators who knowingly disregard this request may be liable for damages. Not marked, no access, is not an exception to the required 48-hour period, unless otherwise agreed between the operator and the excavator. It is the operator or locator who must coordinate any alternative arrangements. Excavators are not responsible for resolving access issues. It is, however, in the best interest of safety, damage prevention, and time management that excavators and operators and locators work together to overcome issues. The law is clear on the required 48-hour marking requirement. Locating and marking must be completed within the required 48-hour time period, with one exception, unless otherwise agreed upon between the operator and the excavator, which requires a two-way agreement in which the excavator must provide a response. Failed attempts to contact the excavator do not satisfy this requirement. Excavators, however, must answer the phone number provided on the notice. The 48-hour period stands if no agreement can be reached. An agreed-to marking schedule is only valid when there is a mutual agreement between an operator or locator and an excavator. There are requirements for submitting an agreed-to marking schedule. An operator or locator must provide the following documentation: the name of the excavator with whom the agreement was made, the phone number of the excavator with whom the agreement was made, the date and time when the alternative arrangement was made, the new agreed-to marking schedule, and the locator's credentials. The online ticketing and mapping system is one of the most effective tools for excavators. The following is a brief overview of the process. The system is accessed online via the Iowa One Call website. Note that completing the profile section for future ticketing saves time. Begin by selecting the desired ticket type. Choose from New Ticket, Dig-In Ticket, Emergency Ticket, Design Information Ticket, or the Joint Meet Ticket. When completing a new ticket, you will first see a map of Iowa. Type in the address, location by name, or general area description. Switching to the satellite mode will provide much better detail. The system will then bring up a satellite image of the selected area. The zoom feature will provide extreme detail and provide for a much more effective ticket. Continue to zoom in until you reach the desired magnification. Next, select from the mapping tools to create the most precise reference to where the planned excavation will occur. This is the Route tool, which allows the user to draw an elongated polygon and enter the exact size and dimension in feet. Here, the Circle tool allows the user to identify multiple detailed areas, including the exact diameter of the circles in feet. This is the same area that has been overgridded and does not convey a specific area with any detail. Overgridding will likely lead to a ticket status of not marked inadequate information. The difference between the overgridded polygon map and the precision polygon mapped with the Route tool and the Circle tool is highly significant. When used properly, as presented here, the resulting description can qualify as an exception to the white lining rule. The electronic joint meet process is an excellent tool for large or highly detailed, extensive or ongoing excavation projects, allowing excavators to schedule on-site meets with locators, and for providing a unique mapping system for inputting large project tickets covering large geographic areas. The mapping system automatically breaks out large parent tickets into the appropriate number of individual tickets based on the 1,500-foot by 1,500-foot mapping rules. Excavators can manage the individual ticket areas as needed, informing locators which ticket areas need locating or refreshed based on where the current activity is taking place. As part of the ongoing process to mitigate delays and maximize efficiency, Iowa One Call recently implemented a new relocate option process, which helps to reduce unnecessary relocates. Excavators can decide if relocates are necessary when renewing a notice by identifying which markings are still intact and which need relocating. Excavators can select all, some, or none to receive the appropriate relocates. This is a voluntary option where operators decide whether to participate. Not all operators will participate. Some may choose to always provide relocates. Excavators must still wait the required 48-hour time period prior to excavating, unless the markings are intact and the original notice is still valid. Make sure to renew the notice prior to when the original notice concludes. The latest program is designed to deal with non-response issues when locators fail to complete the marking on time. The process involves notifying key management within affected operator organizations, copy specified contacts on second or subsequent non-response notices, track the progress or lack of progress on all non-responses, and record and maintain non-response data for investigative purposes. As this program concludes, the audience is reminded to take precautionary measures to mitigate potential liabilities by diligently recording and documenting any incidents or occurrences at the excavation site. A hit kit is a great tool for documenting the locate markings, whether they are off more than 18 inches horizontally, whether the markings are absent, or whether they are incomplete. Are you using your hit kits?